Hello there, I'm Ajit Pio from Plusprep. This is the introduction to GRE video, and in this video we will discuss the structure of the GRE, the mechanism of how the test works, and some strategies of how to make your preparation more effective. If you're watching this video, chances are that you're most probably planning to go abroad, specifically to do your master's or an MBA, and possibly in the United States. The GRE is a prerequisite for most universities and most programs for master's and MBA programs all across the world. The GRE is designed by ETS, Education Testing Services. They also test another test, the TOEFL, which is an essential English language test for everyone interested in going to the US. The GRE is valid for 5 years and you can take it multiple times. In fact, you can take it up to 5 times in a year, but we recommend that you limit it to about 2 times a year, mostly because it is an expensive test to take and also because it is essential to have a game plan before you take your first GRE attempt. It is very, very ineffective to go in and take your GRE without a game plan and a good structured preparation well beforehand. If you're going to take the GRE or if you plan to take the GRE more than twice, it's very likely that your preparation and as a result your scores will fizzle out and will not be a productive venture. So let's take a look at the structure and some of the basic elements of the test before we go into discussing the challenges of the GRE and also how to overcome them. Right? So the GRE consists of 3 scored section types. There's the AWA or analytical writing assessment, which are also the essays. There is the verbal reasoning and also the quantitative reasoning. Now the AWA is scored from 0 to 6. There are 2 tasks here. The average of this is provided in your official score. The first task is the issue task and the second is the argument task. These are the first tasks that you will see as soon as you start the test. Each of these tasks are 30 minutes long and like I said, the score range goes from 0 to 6. It is very important not to obsess about getting a perfect score on this task, mostly because number one, this is the first task that you get, and the more mental resources you use here, the less mental resources you're left with for the rest of the test, which is quite a long and arduous journey. Now, also the second point as to why you shouldn't really obsess about getting a 6 is that the AWS score isn't a selection criteria. It is more of a hygiene factor in that as long as you're able to get a 4 plus, you're good. Right? Only for students who get a 3 or a 3.5 and below will there be some red flags raised as to why their scores are so low. So to reiterate, your ideal score is about 4.5 to 5, and getting this is very easy if you understand what exactly is being tested in these tasks and what is expected of you as a writer to write in these tasks. The next component is the verbal reasoning. There are 2 sections here, and together these give you a score of 130 to 170. Now these 2 sections can be interspersed in any order throughout the rest of the test, but what will be common is that they will each have 20 questions and they will each be 30 minutes long. These 2 together will give you a score of 130 to 170, of which a 155 is considered an ideal score for most Asian or Indian students. Quantitative reasoning also has 2 sections and you will have 20 questions each, but a little bit more time per section than verbal, about exactly 35 minutes per section. Again, the score range is the same as verbal, but your target score should be a little above that of verbal. A target score of 165 out of the possible 170 is definitely possible with strategized preparation, especially if you're from a mathematical background or if you're an engineering student. There is also an experimental section which you cannot identify while taking the test, and this is unique because it is unscored. This will not affect your overall score. It could either be verbal reasoning or quantitative reasoning. It will look and feel exactly like your scored section, but from the scoring perspective, they will not consider this. And there's no way for you to know whether the section that you just did was experimental or not. So one of the biggest issues or one of the biggest challenges students face is the time factor in itself. The GRE, including the breaks and the experimental section, comes to about 4 hours, and that's quite a lot of time. it's very hard for an individual to sit and focus continuously for more than even 10 to 20 minutes, let alone 4 hours at a stretch. And this, as a result, creates a situation where students become less and less capable of comprehending and working at 100% after the 2 hour mark. And this will reduce your ability to be consistently performing, and as a result also taper down your score towards the end. So the challenge of stamina or consistency becomes very, very apparent on the GRE, especially when you take it in one full sitting. So what I would suggest is that all of you take one full mock test. This could either be from the official resource or the official guide, and take it completely. Time yourself. Make sure you take the timed version of it. Take it along with the essays and do all the sections. This will give you a very good idea and a very good taste of what the GRE is like and how you should be gearing yourself up for preparing for this test. Just looking at question types or preparing for question types will not be a good strategy, because that is not what you'll be doing on the day of the test. It will be an intense 4-hour long marathon session that you need to sort of come through. Let's look at the scoring and more accurately the mechanism of how this test works. So the first section of verbal and quant, the score sections, are going to be of a medium difficulty. And what I mean by that is that the average of all the questions within that section, when you put in the difficulty, when you average out the difficulty, it will be of medium difficulty. So the GRE gradates the difficulty level of questions from 1 to 5. So when you average out the difficulty levels, it'll probably come to around a 3 around a 3 is what you'll get in the first verbal and the first quant section. So this test is a multi-stage testing system. Now what that means is the second section of verbal and the second section of quant will adapt to how you've performed in the first section of verbal and the first section of quant respectively. Do note that verbal section 1 will only affect verbal section 2, quant section 1 will only affect quant section 2. The experimental section will have no interlink with any of this. It will just be randomly selected and it will not affect your multi-stage testing system in any way. So let's say you've performed really, really well in the first verbal section. What will happen to you? Well, the second section will be much harder. The questions on average will be much, much harder. On the other hand, if you perform mediocrely, you'll probably get a medium section, and if you perform really bad, you'll get an easy section in the second section. What is the significance of this? Well, as soon as you get to a harder section, your score cap sort of goes way higher. Now it becomes very likely for you to get a much higher score. Even if you mess up the second section, you're very likely to get a very good score. Let's say you get about 18 questions right in the first section and only about 5 questions right in the second section. You will still be able to get a 150 plus quite easily. On the other hand, if you do the first section really badly, let's say you get only 5 questions right in the first section, but get almost every question right in the second section, you still may not reach a 150 score. So what happens is that as soon as you enter a score range, the maximum score that you could possibly get sort of gets capped off. And this is a real limitation. So the idea is to ensure that you do really well in the first section, get as many questions right as possible in the first section, and get a harder section so that you maximize the chances of getting the highest probable score that you can. So the takeaway is that it is important to do really well on the first sections of verbal and quant. Let's look at some tools and features that are available for you during the GRE. So one of the features is that there is no negative marking on the GRE. There is also another feature where when you're within a verbal section, let's say you're in verbal section 1, you can approach the questions in any order that you like, in any fashion that you like. You can start from the last section, you can skip a question, you can change the answers for a question when you go to the review screen. You can also use something called a mark button. There's a mark button available that you can use to mark questions that you want to come back to later. This helps you manage time more effectively. So to reiterate, you may attempt each question within a section in any order. Every question within a particular section is valued the same irrespective of its difficulty level, right? So the idea being that to maximize the number of scores or number of questions you get right, you want to focus on the easy and the medium questions in the first section, and not so much on the hard questions, because hard questions are going to take you more time. You're better off spending the appropriate amount of time for easy and medium and getting as many of those right, or rather getting 100% of them right, and then sort of using strategic guessing to get the remainder of the hard questions right. This strategy will help you get the maximum marks or maximum points among the question set that you have, especially in the first section. You can also utilize the feature to skip, mark, or review a question in any part, in any aspect or any part of the test, as long as you're within a section. Remember, once your time ends, once the 30 minutes ends in verbal, you may not go back to the previous section or change any of the questions. That section ends logically for that test. A quick information on how to register for the GRE. So before we go into more test preparation strategies and discussing why the test is difficult, let's see how we can go about registering for the test. Now, the GRE is an exam where you register for at ets.org. You can send your scores to 4 universities free of cost. This happens on the day of the test itself. The unofficial scores for the AWA are displayed after about a week or up to 16 days. The unofficial score for the other sections, verbal and quant, appears instantly, right after you finish the test. You may choose to cancel the test as well if things have not gone as planned. So the GRE also has a feature called Score Select option, where once after you finish the test, you could go back, log into your registered portal after your official scores are out, and select which of those scores, assuming that you've taken the GRE multiple times, select which of the scores you want to send to which university. So you can sort of tailor your application and score reporting process. Remember, if you're an Indian, you have to ensure that you take a valid ID proof, and this, in your case, will be an original passport. Do not take a duplicate, do not take a photocopy, take the original passport and make sure there's at least 6 months of validity remaining in your passport.